we talk in here about the fact that YouTube is back up. We talk in here a lot of times about the fact that uh, we are constantly getting new information as a field right now. There's constantly this influx of new stuff with all these new abilities. And with this influx of stuff with all these new abilities, we're finding that that influx of new information is changing things overnight, all the time, constantly, right? And with that constant change and that constant flux of information, something we said 10 years ago might be completely untrue now. Neanderthals couldn't speak 10 years ago, and we know they can now. Sorry, excuse me. And we know they can now, right? And so when we're looking at these things, we have to understand that any information that we have now could change tomorrow. And I'll fully admit that most of the time, like I'll tell you. Um, and we have to understand that all the information that we're getting is because of new testing. And so what we're seeing is that we're finding with this new testing things like, even though we've pushed back Neanderthals by 100,000 years, it still doesn't look like they had any more than 500,000 as a species whole. Now, how do we tell that? Or am I just lying with big numbers, right? What we do is we look at the genome of the Neanderthals that we have, and we can see the genetic diversity, lack thereof genetic diversity within them. And then when you're looking at a DNA line, you can trace how many generations back that DNA line goes. That's how we know that Indigenous Australians were in Australia 65 to 70,000 years ago, because their mitochondrial Eve is in Australia 60 to 75,000 years ago. The originator of all the mitochondrial female lines of descent is in Australia 65 to 70,000 years ago. We can trace generations of Y DNA, but again, Y DNA only goes directly through the male line. So father to son to grandson to great grandson. It does not translate at all into a daughter. So a man's daughter is going to get his mother's X from him, right? And so in getting that mother's X, she's passing along and carrying on his maternal line, not his paternal line. He only passes his Y DNA to his son. So with this, we can trace back how long generations go, how long this mitochondrial line or this Y line lived. And we can also look and see, like currently you'll see that there was an article that came out talking about, I think, 14 Neanderthals in France towards the end of their time period. And it's in like this cave system that looks like it's pretty much an apartment complex. Pretty fucking cool to me. And what we're seeing with it is that pretty much everybody was married to their cousin or their aunt in this group, right? We see a father-daughter pairing where the daughter is actually like a daughter niece of the, or a daughter cousin of the father, right? So we see that there's this narrowing of genetic diversity. And then when we look at the DNA samples that we're pulling from these core samples at this point, we're also able to track that we had more genetic diversity in Neanderthals further back, which is how we're able to say, okay, so they were extremely genetically diverse here, and then that genetic diversity narrowed. A bottleneck is kind of what they call it usually. And that bottlenecking is because of an extinction event, right? So if you have 100,000 people in your population today, and in a year you have 10,000 people in your population, there's an extreme bottleneck, there's an extreme almost extinction event, right? And then that 10,000 people have to repopulate. And to do that repopulation, what you really need at that point, without becoming inbred, you have to have outside help. You'd have to have admixture, which is why you're seeing admixture with Homo neanderthal breeding into Homo denisovian and Homo sapien, because they're recognizing that they're marrying their own cousin, and nobody wants to marry their cousin if there's something better on the horizon, right? Even the royal families that married in eventually realized the damage that, marrying completely within the royal family was actually doing. So, um, YouTube is back up. I'm not seeing anybody back over there. I hope that the people were over here or who were over there are actually in YouTube because I adore them. They're good people. Not YouTube or in TikTok. So, what we're seeing with this again, we see a population that is genetically diverse in its start. Um, Still less genetic diversity than we have, right? They still never make it into a large population scale like we do. And they were around longer than we were by like 270,000 years. They've been around longer than us. And so we're seeing that they were genetically diverse in their start. And then that genetic diversity collapses, and then they revamp it, they bring it back up, not to its prior height, and it looks like with a replacement of Y DNA. So basically, it would say that maybe all their men died out, right? In half, maybe there was a huge plague, and the men died out because they were susceptible to the plague, and half of the women die out, right? And so then the women are breeding with the Homo sapien men that they're coming in contact with at this point of time, right? So with that, what we're seeing is a shrink of the population, a bottleneck, a resurgence of the population, a shrink of the population again, and then a lack of existence, right? I do always want to reiterate that with Neanderthals, what we're seeing is not that they have completely gone extinct, right? There's more Neanderthal DNA on the planet currently than there was during the time of their species. If there's only 500,000 of them as a species whole, and they put their DNA into everybody on the planet except for two spaces in Africa, and we are at 8 billion people, even at 2% Neanderthal DNA, which I think is the average, even at 2% Neanderthal DNA, there's still more, right? Say 7 billion people, right? 7 billion at 2% outweighs 500,000, right? It outweighed 500,000 probably when it got to the second billion, right? Um, so there's definitely a lot more Neanderthal DNA on the planet today. I'm trying to make sure that I'm going over everything with the DNA part of it before I open up for questions. I might touch on a couple other things that I've missed as we move on. I'm going to go ahead though and open it up for questions. This is the first live on this, so it will be a little bit scattered as I'm trying to learn how to impart this information. You guys all get to be my guinea pigs for a hot second. Um, so I ask that we don't do racism and we don't do phobia based on gender and desire in my chat. Awesome. Because of the fact that I teach anti-race in here. Like my field developed theory of race, my field debunked the theory of race. Race does not exist. It is the fallacy. Racism exists, culture and ethnicity exist, but race does not exist. And so I don't deal with racism. Well, I do, but you won't like it. And I don't do phobias based on gender and desire around here either. Yeah, I totally understand that one, Shaylee. It's very hard sometimes, right, to deal with that very colonial structure dictating whether or not we get to be indigenous, right? Like it can be really fucking frustrating. I get that one. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Um, oh, Manenden. So if you go to my link tree, my bio, and you scroll all the way down, there's a couple of sites that you will actually be able to upload your DNA to, which will actually do that too. Like they'll give you even a director link to grave sites. DNA says you share a paternal ancestor with Denisova 8. Is that possible being Indo-European? Absolutely. So there is showing of some like not Northwestern European, but some kind of Central or Far Eastern European having Denisovian DNA as well, right? But it's a micro percent that's way less than even the Turtle Island indigenous DNA. And so, really, what that is that admixture coming from other hominins, not necessarily from directly from the Denisovians generally, right? It could be that in your paternal line, there is East Asian in your paternal line that you don't know of, or Austrasian in your paternal line that you don't know of, and that's where that direct paternal ancestry comes in. If you are your Indo-European and there's not any Denisovian in the space that your ancestry generally comes from, we have so much admixture we just don't realize, right? Because we like to think that we've been in those spaces for a few thousand years and that dictates who we are. But the thing is even in those few thousand years, we've been constantly moving. We only stopped being global for like a hot second, right? We were global, and then science and medicine were eradicated, and we stopped being global and we stopped learning, and then we started again, you know, and then we got to the internet, and now we became global again, right? But we've always moved around, so that's probably where you're getting that in. I don't want to do that. So you can get off of really any genetic test whether or not you have Neanderthal and Denisovian DNA. Sorry, my nose has a cat hair somewhere in it today. I have lots of long hairs. You can get off of like 23andMe and Ancestry, or really any place that you get your DNA done, whether or not you have Neanderthal or Denisovian DNA. It'll give you a percentage usually. Then it'll also tell you you have more than this percentage of society. That's bullshit. Don't listen to, but take the percentage that it tells you usually to heart. It's pretty accurate. You can even take that DNA test and upload it to, again, the other side. It's at the bottom of the link tree in my bio, and it will tell you a little bit more about it. It will even give you specific genes that you get from the Neanderthals and the Denisovian. I get my dark skin gene from the Neanderthals. Like the genetic skin gene that I have is dark skin, and it actually comes from Neanderthal genes. So, and another evidence that Neanderthals do have the genetics for dark skin, but a show that you can actually find the micro evidences of skin, or different like freckles, it'll tell you, and hair color and eye color, and it will tell you if you get those, the Neanderthal gene for that, or if you have the Homo sapien gene for that. So it's pretty cool. Um, So I am not working on anything having to do with Homo sapiens currently. And so I'm not going to be able to do a picture of a timeline for Africa or anywhere else right now. And I don't generally focus on Africa or Turtle Island in my things with that. I generally focus on Indo European, um, mainly because as an Indigenous person, I'm trying to teach Europeans their space, right? So that they stop appropriating other space, because a lot of people want to find their own ancestry and want to have that, empowerment that our ancestry gives us. But their blockage from that, which we get in many different things, right? And it definitely is not more in Europeans than it is in other people. It's definitely more in other people. But that blockage makes a lot of European ancestry people within the United States appropriate culture from other space. And so my main job when I'm teaching Homo sapiens is to show Europeans their own indigeneity so that they're not taking indigeneity from other peoples, basically. Um, And so I'm going to give it just a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to turn off the comments. So if you have questions to ask, go ahead and type them in now. I'll give you enough time to do so. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn it into subscriber comments only so I can read back through them. I haven't been to Afghanistan. I've been to Iraq and Kuwait, and, you know, I spent more time in Islam as a child than I did in Christianity. So I have a lot of love for Islam, right? In fact, I have more love for Islam than I do for Christianity. Um, so, I mean, I've been to the desert, left my horse here, but I've been to the desert. I'm good and not going back right yet. I have other places to go before I go back to the desert, though I will probably end up going back to the desert. Just because the world, right? Just because the world. Okay, so with much love, I'm going to turn off comments and go ahead and read back through them so I can see everything and answer as many questions as I can. And then we'll go into speech and hearing within Neanderthals. Again, today's conversation is about Neanderthal. Um, I'm going to try and answer as many questions as I possibly can. Though some of it gets a little bit weird and I won't answer that. It's not a theory. So let's discuss what science is for a hot second. Science is I observe in nature and I have a hypothesis or a thought of what that means. And then I predict what that thought means. And then I test that prediction. And if the test proves true, it's a theory. A theory is something that has been proven by fact. Now, every theory that we have, we retest because you have to retest. It has to be a theory, to be scientific, it has to be replicable, like the testing has to be replicated or replicable. And it has to constantly be tested, right? You can't just, oh, that's it. That's all, right? Nothing in this world is all forever. That's just not how it works, right? This is facts for now. But a theory is facts for now. So it's a theory, it's facts for now, right? It's a fact until something proves it wrong. So it would be my hypothesis, but my hypotheses are based on facts and evidence that somebody else is testing, like the website, the link tree in my bio, that has all the sources from archaeological journals for the subjects that we're discussing today. So all of my stuff is based on other archaeologists and anthropologists. I have a degree in it, that's my field. Other archaeologists and anthropologists compiling their research and publishing papers and showing what their research has given them. So we're discussing currently, and we were discussing the new DNA testing and the new ways that they've been able to figure out different things about Neanderthals and how they have figured these out. So you can kind of see the weight that we're talking with about this and these really cool new inventions that they have that they're working with right now. This is Neanderthal. Everywhere has Neanderthal. The only space on the planet that does not have Neanderthal, there are two spaces in Africa, the Oyo population in West Africa and the Khoisan population in South Africa. And they have three ghost species in them. So all of humanity has admixture, but those are the only spaces that don't have Neanderthal. Everywhere else, even in Africa, has Neanderthal. Neanderthal is global. Shaylee, lack of wisdom teeth and tailbones, proof of adaptation happening and related to low Neanderthal DNA. I'm not sure if you mean like the lack of wisdom teeth in current humans. I'm not sure. If we're talking about current humans, I really don't know that. I do know that like we haven't had a tail for over 7 million years. We just haven't, right? And so the idea, I do know of vestigial tails. I actually have my daughter's godparents' daughter, firstborn, had a vestigial. So like I do know of vestigial tails and things like that, but I do know that we're not really like as a species way prior to our species, we haven't had a tail. It does happen occasionally. And it it is absolutely proof of speciation and adaptation. And I do know that in things like Neanderthals, though not in what we see with Denisovians, we're the only species other than Denisovian, or they're the only other species other than us that the teeth go back all the way to the mandible, right? All other species have this gap between the last tooth and the bend of the man, right? And we only have one Denisovian jaw, but we believe that Denisovian doesn't have that gap either. So wisdom teeth are kind of an us thing that others don't have. And so it might be that the wisdom teeth themselves are a proof of an adaptation. And then the lack that we see sometimes in different Homo sapiens today is maybe a proof of something else. I don't know. I do try to tell the truth. It is big to me. I try to be accountable always. Um, so thank you, Torini. It is true that the idea of black and white is constructed about 500 years ago. Actually, the entire theory of race doesn't start developing or start becoming even a thing to think of until Turtle Island is invaded. When Turtle Island is invaded, we start to see race starting to become an idea. Like we start to see the idea that we see the word race, but it doesn't mean what it does now. But we see the idea of uh, we see the idea that different groups of people have different levels of intelligence, kindness, ability, things like that really start when we see Turtle Island invaded. And really, the theory of race gets codified in the 1800s, and it is and has always been justification for white atrocity. It was created by white people to justify their atrocity, their whole doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny ideas. And it has always been about that justification of atrocity. Um, they used very they used very shitty techniques to decide what races were what, and ideas that are arbitrary, like they don't matter. They have nothing to do with the deeper scheme of things, right? And so the color of your skin has nothing to do with whether or not you can feel pain. And yet the theory of race tells us that it does. And that's how come they were performing hysterectomies on black women without anesthesia, because they believed that being black meant that you didn't feel pain the same way Europeans did. And they still believe that today in medicine. And that is why the United States has the highest maternal mortality rate of the industrialized world, primarily among Black and Brown women. So, absolutely, race is an idea created by Europeans to justify their atrocity, to give them a right to kill people. Because, othering, though, is about 10,000 years old, and it comes in our first stratified societies, and it starts with we in the city are civilized, and those barbarians in the hills are here to steal your food. And it is definitely something to maintain power. Um, Race is just the latest iteration, the latest development within othering. And so we definitely see that justification. I mean, it's time to call them out. It's time to hold accountable. And well, racism is still fuck the entire system within the United States is built on racism, right? Like it's a racist structure. Well, racism is still extremely prevalent. Race does not exist. Culture and ethnicity does. So because if your family line still exists, no, I think it will be better if we do that. The Basque, okay? The Basque people are people that have been there for like 8,000 years. They don't have any admixture really from anywhere else. They have adapted in such a way that there's actually skeletal differences in the Basque population. They're really the only population that has actual like distinguishable skeletal differences. It's not an average, and it's very distinguishable, like a bone thickness and like an extra rib, like or at least that's what I've been told by Basque people. Um, so uh, when we look at the Basque people, if the Basque people continue to breed with outsiders, in for they have for the last 100 years, and if they continue to do it for a couple hundred more years, and now we only have the singular one mitochondrial line of Basque left. Say there's currently 5 mitochondrial lines of Basque and there's 2 Y DNAs of Basque left. Say we only have that one mitochondrial line left and one Y line left. Okay, we still have a mitochondrial DNA for Basque and we still have a Y DNA for Basque. They still exist, right? Um, that admixture is just admixture. And within us, like we share 95% of our DNA with the planet. 95% of tree, 95% of banana, 95% of dog, 95% of anything else on this planet. Of that extra little 5%, right? We share 99.9% with everybody, right? It's only in that 0.02, 0.3% that there are small visible differences, right? Genetics, family lines absolutely plays a part, right? If your grandma was susceptible to heart problems, you're likely to be susceptible to heart problems, but it's not because of the color of your skin, it's because grandma was susceptible to heart problems. Um, so if the vast majority of us is all the same DNA, and the entire percentage of any other DNA, like the largest percentage of any other DNA is 6% of Denisovian in the uh, Australian people, indigenous people, right? 6% still gives you 94% Homo sapien, right? So are you no longer Homo sapien because your finger is cut off? Am I no longer human because, am I no longer human because, like I've been able to dye my skin blue, or I can dye my hair green, right? It's just a small percentage of the overall. So we're still here, and all of us are Homo sapien. We just all have admixture. It's not that the species is gone. It's not that we're different species. We're all the same. We just all have a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, right? Is it still frozen, Dan? I opened up a new YouTube live. Are you in the new one or the old one? That one might have frozen and it might still be up. YouTube is so frustrating. I apologize. And I can't get TikTok to work on my computer because I need a key. The topic today is Neanderthalis, Homo Neanderthal. How do I know? I am an anthropologist and an archaeologist. Haha, yay. I am an archaeologist and an anthropologist. And this is what I do. Paleoanthropology is my fascination and my focus. And so that's how I know, because I did a lot of reading and studying on it. I don't know why you look the way you look like. I don't even know what you look like. So can't tell you why you look the way you look. Well, active, you're free to scroll on. Um, Active again, there's a link to in my bio. And studies show that all of Africa, except for 2 spaces in Africa, have Neanderthal DNA, and that the entire globe has Neanderthal DNA. That's what the studies show. And the studies show that this is not admixture from like colonization, right? This is not because of colonialism, right? And So currently, we know that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived in the Levant area for 100,000 years and did the vast majority of their breeding in that Levant area. That Levant area is right next to Egypt and North Africa, and they traveled into Egypt and North Africa. We've been in Egypt since Homo habilis, so 2.5 million years we've been in Egypt. Um, not only do Africans had Neanderthal DNA before Europeans existed. Africans had Neanderthal DNA before Europeans existed. So, not only do they, yes, have Neanderthal DNA, but they had Neanderthal DNA before European happened, before anybody was in Europe. They were the first to get it, right? Because they were still African, right? So, same to you, user. So tattoo smiles. People say that the Olmec heads look black, but if you put the Olmec heads side by side with indigenous people in that area, you'll see that the Olmec heads actually are phenotypically Turtle Island indigenous. Let me show you a picture really quick. This is going to pause me just because of the way my thing works. If you're over on YouTube, give me just a second. I'm trying to pull something up and it takes a minute for me to do it on TikTok, and it kind of gives me this little bit of a slowdown. But let me see if I can find this. I'll do it. Yeah, here we go. Look, see? Olmec heads look like Turtle Island indigenous people. The idea that broad noses and thick lips are only found in Africa is false. It's just false. Um, and in fact, if you get to, so the Olmec head is lower in Mexico, I believe. The Dene language goes from the lowest tip of Mexico up into the plains of the Midwest. And it also is all along the Pacific Northwestern coast. These are all Dene language groups, which means that they, like Indo-European language groups, all originate in the same space, all originate from the same group of people. And if you look between the Dene people and if you look at the people in the Pacific Northwest, you will see very round faces often, and very flat noses that are broad often, and very thick lips often. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest among indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest, and the look of people in the Pacific Northwest that are indigenous compared to the look of people that are the Plains indigenous groups, right? Completely different, like completely different. And in the Pacific Northwest, what you're seeing, and in the Dene people as well, what you have a tendency to see is a rounder face with a flatter nose with broader nostrils and larger lips. This is something that we see frequently within Turtle Island indigenous people. So the reason that you're seeing that within yourself is because you have that heritage within yourself. You're Turtle Island indigenous. And as Turtle Island indigenous people, not only do we have a wide range of skin tone because we're two extremely large continents, Turtle Island and Abiyaya, but we also see that within these two continents, we had a wide variety of latitudes and a wide variety of needs to adapt to, right? And so you absolutely see that all the phenotypes of any nose and lip, even curly hair and gray eyes, are all here within Turtle Island indigenous people. Um, so you might look black because you look indigenous, and we just commonly associate that specific look as black instead of indigenous, which it is. And again, features are global. You can be from Africa and have very thin lips and a very fine nose. We see it all the time, and it has nothing to do with colonization. You can have 4C hair, and be Scandinavian with no African recent ancestry, right? You can be a Turtle Islander and have curly hair and gray eyes, right? Um, you can get all of these things everywhere. The Sandra Lang case is an extremely famous case of two white parents having a black child. These are recessive genes, and recessive genes will pop forward in spaces. Um, it happens all the time. Doesn't identify me. Um, my name's Sarah. That's it. I'm Sarah, and I'm a widow. That's as far as I'll identify myself. I prefer widow, just because, and I don't need to, like, I've spent too much time in the streets and too many arrests to really want to dox myself online. And I do a lot more doxing of myself online than I want to. So the only name you get is my first one. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ah, sorry, I don't know what that fucking did. Whoa. You guys all wanted to see my black lipstick up close, didn't you? That was the goal for today. That was me trying to scroll through the comments. I missed the racist comment. I am hoping that it got blocked. Is there a particular advanced ancient society theory collapse that you find most convincing? Nope, I don't find any of them convincing. I think that we were all advanced. People are like, oh, the pyramids around the world means that there was one society that taught all of these people the pyramids because they all look alike. None of them look alike. Fuck that noise. The pyramids in Africa are square and straight sided and smooth as fuck with a cap. The pyramids in Tenochtitlan are straight sided and they're square, but they have different caps and they're steps pyramids. And their top, instead of being a cap itself, is an altar space. And they have like these different big stones up the side. There's nothing smooth about their sides. The pyramid in Peru is a rectangle. The pyramid in Indonesia is an oval. Yeah, there's pyramids all over the world if we're talking about several sides meeting at a point, right? And none of them look the same. Has nothing to do with one singular ancient society giving a bunch of people information. The ancient aliens and ancient apocalypse theories are white saber theories, and I don't believe them. I do believe we were all extremely intelligent, and I do believe that we were all extremely advanced. I believe that in 400 CE, when Constantine decides to make Christianity a state religion, it gets stamped out among the Europeans. And when it gets stamped out among the Europeans, they decide nobody else has it because they don't. But the fact of the matter is everybody else had it. And as the Europeans start going in and killing people, people lose it. Right? As the Europeans start their colonialism with their need to stamp out science and medicine in their colonialism, because that's what they do in their colonialism is stamp out science and medicine, we lose it then. But it's not an ancient apocalypse. It's things that we had, and we had them up until the Europeans decided to stamp it out, up until Christianity starts with the Europeans, and then the Europeans end up stamping it out across the globe. Um, Islam was extremely medically advanced and is documented as such by the Europeans. They just considered it a sin because their God said that you couldn't do science or medicine. So that's my advanced ancient society theory that I believe in. I don't think you have an Australopithecus gene. To my knowledge, so we only have DNA currently from Neanderthal and Denisovian. So the only things that they're going to be able to name for you are Neanderthal and Denisovian. We have no DNA from Australopithecus. And Australopithecus is an ancestor, not somebody who lived alongside us to breed with. So Neanderthal is a different species that lived alongside us with a common ancestor that was recent, and that's how we were able to breed with them. Australopithecus was gone by for 2 million years by the time we came around. Along away. Please read Radisson, the founder of the Hudson Bank Company. He was enslaved by indigenous people from Ohio. Okay. I don't read white authors, and I certainly don't read colonialists at all. Won't. Everything they write is propaganda, and everything they write is bullshit. I do know where journals document different things, absolutely, but I'm not going to read some colonial author who is bitching about being enslaved by people he was genociding. Good for him. Good for them. Thank God they enslaved his ass because he probably would have killed more people otherwise. Just saying. God didn't make anything advanced. Neither did Allah, because Allah is just God, and your monotheistic deity doesn't work for me. Linktree is in my bio, in my TikTok bio. This is a Tom Borkland rendition of Homo neanderthalis. No, Carrie, the ice age doesn't result in people walking across to Australia. It results in people crossing water. Hey, this is Tamara. So the Wallace Trench has always been below the sea level. So the Wallace Trench has always been water. And since the Wallace Trench has always been water, what we're seeing is that to get to the island of Flores in Indonesia and to get to the islands in the Philippines that Homo luzonensis is on, Erectus had to cross water. They're now showing actually that Erectus sails around the Mediterranean too. Like they're finding evidence of Erectus crossing water in the Mediterranean. Um, but we're also seeing that indigenous Australians are able to cross water early on as well, right? These are again things that are lost. We also know that at 20,000 years ago, the Japanese are sailing at 20,000 years ago, right? But these are things that are lost along the path. Just these knowledges. And again, they're lost not through some ancient apocalypse, but because Europeans decide that knowledge is not power, right? Europeans decide that knowledge is questioning God. And so they move into these spaces and they remove these spaces knowledge, usually forced. Well, always forced. I don't have a picture of Java Man. Oh, you mean the one that I have before? I can absolutely put up Java Man, though we're not talking. Java Man is a Homo erectus, and we're not talking. I know that that has gone silent over there. That's why I'm not talking, because I know now that it just absolutely goes silent when I do this. Where are you? Where are you? I'll change it back in a minute, but there's my picture of Java Man that I get. This is a Kinnis and Kinnis image. Kinnis and Kinnis is in the link tree of my bio. This is Homo erectus. I'm going to go ahead and change it back really quick. General consensus is that the first origins of violence are 10,000 years ago. That's the general consensus within the paleoanthropological community. We see one thing that looks like it could be violence prior to that, but it's not evidence. It's not definitive. It could be anything else too, right? Like if somebody's head smashed in, you can't tell whether or not they were smashed in because a cave fell on top of them or because somebody else hit them, right? Um, and so definitive evidence of violence we don't see until 10,000 years ago. And that's the general knowledge. That's general consensus within the paleoanthropological community. There are no Neanderthal within the Oyo population of West Africa and the Khoisan population of South Africa, but those two populations have 3 ghost species within them. Okay. My tattoo, that one, that's which is the ancient Irish script. And well, it's Celtic. We found it in more places than Ireland now. And it's Irish Gaelic, and it says "Speak out." I have Owen on my ankle that says "Step up." If you haven't heard "Rising Appalachia," is my link tree not in my bio anymore? Did I don't think I changed it. I can't pull it up on my phone right now. Um, I'll look after this and see why it's not in my bio, but it should be in my bio, brown girl. Uh, and if it's not, it will be after this live. I'll go and make sure and double check. What the fuck? Okay. Well, let's here. Let me fix it really quick. I'm not sure why. What I'll do is I'll just put it in the actual bio itself instead of the like it's supposed to have a link to it. Um, but it might be that they decided that they're not doing those anymore. So 1 second, and we'll just do it this way so that it can be. Okay, go and double check. It should be in my bio now. Um, and let me go back and see what that says that I was stating. The general consensus on the origin of violence. Yeah, it was a link, but I just put it in the bio itself because apparently there. I don't know if they took down links, like they took down pinned comments and all sorts of other stuff. So maybe they took down links. But and I'll go and look at it later to double check. So with the general consensus on the origin of violence, the general consensus is we're not really seeing violence until about 10,000 years ago. And at 10,000 years ago is where we start to see violence. We do have one instance that I've talked about before that, which is like a spear point in somebody's thigh, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's human, unhuman, like actual try of violence. Like you could be out hunting and actually accidentally hit your buddy, right? So definitive, yes, this is obviously that and nothing else is 10,000 years ago. There is some evidence of cannibalism in Neanderthals, I think, but again, that doesn't necessitate violence, right? So the Donner Party isn't killing people to eat them. They're waiting till they're dead and then eating them because they're starving. So it's absolutely possible that Neanderthals were going through a starvation period and eating their dead, right? Or there are many groups of people who have believed that eating your dead imbues you with the dead and therefore you're carrying on the dead, like you'll eat their heart to take on their courage, right? And so there are absolutely groups of people who have done religious cannibalism. So it could be even something along that lines because we are seeing it at the same time period where we are seeing cannibals Neanderthals starting to like associate different things like uh paintings and decoration of bodies. So this and burial. So this it would be, yeah, it could possibly be that. Let's talk really quick because we've only got about another half an hour really before I'm going to take off, maybe a little bit longer depending on how long this takes. But let's talk really quick about hearing and vocal ability. So we have thought for 200 years that Neanderthals couldn't speak, right? We find our first Neanderthal in 1850. And 5 years ago, And in fact, I have the article. This was beautiful for me. I had always believed this. I had always thought that this absolutely had to be real. It made absolutely no sense to me that they couldn't speak. Um, but which one is it? Which one is it? In 2016, 2017, we found, I had it up. Now I got to figure out which one of it is. No. We found, I'm not going to have the exact date, but in 2017, we found a hyoid bone for Neanderthal. Good morning, everybody. And the hyoid bone for Neanderthal was able to give us the knowledge that Neanderthal can speak. Now, see, a hyoid bone is extremely small and fragile and thin. That's why it's so easy to break. It's just this little curved bone. And because of that, it degrades fast, right? It's not even something we commonly find in us. So finding the hyoid bone in Neanderthal in 2017 is absolutely our first. Holy shit, they spoke. I I've been studying Neanderthal since I was like 12. It was one of those early things that I really loved. Um, my grandmother was into it. And so when I visited her, I got into it. Um, and I've always thought like it just made no sense to me that they couldn't speak. Um, all animals can make sound, right? Um, and just because, and all animals communicate and everybody communicates. People don't like to think that everybody communicates, but I mean, I really, it's astonishing to me that people don't see barking as communicating, right? It's astonishing to me that people don't see a meow as communicating, right? Or clucking as communicating. Like this is all verbal communication. This is all a vocal language. It just doesn't sound like ours. And so we've decided that we're special, right? And because it doesn't sound like ours, obviously that's not it. Um, but verbal vocal language really seems to be in a lot of different things. The ability to form the sound structures that we form is a little bit different. That is where we get into a differences. The ability to have sustained expression of those sounds. Right. The ability for me to talk for an hour and a half straight. That's where the difference comes in. You're not going to hear your chicken constantly clucking. They'll maybe do it for a few minutes and then they'll stop because they're eating and breathing and doing other shit, right? Yeah. Well, we do know what our dogs are saying. We can hear that difference in their sounds, right? So to me, it made sense that Neanderthals could speak. Finding the hyoid bone was really this holy shit moment. But then they went and they looked. So they can tell speech patterning or speech ability from the pattern of the brain in the base of the skull. I played Sims all night long and I, woke up at 7 o'clock in the morning. So here at the base of your skull, here is where your speech patterning comes in. And when we look at the base of Homo neanderthal skull, Homo denisovians, we do have like a very small chunk in that area of Denisovian skull and Homo erectus skull. When we look at them, we can see the patterns represented in the imprint of the brain on the skull. So inside my brain and inside your brain right now, inside our skull, the brain is right up against the bone in many of the spaces. Okay. There are some spaces that have a little bit of fluid cushioning, but in many of the spaces, it's kind of right there against the bone. And because of that, it kind of like creates this imprint on the bone. And that imprint on the bone is what we're looking at. And from that imprint, we can see that the structure of the brain gives the ability of speech in Neanderthals, in Homo erectus, in early Homo sapiens, and in Denisovian. Again, we've only got like a tiny little chunk of a base of a Denisovian skull, but that's the part that we would need for speech pattern recognition, anyways, right? We also see in the way the rib cage is structured, because for me to speak like this, I have to have a specific structure of the lungs within my rib cage. Um, the way that my rib cage is structured around my lungs gives the space of my lungs and the capacity of my lungs. And the capacity of my lungs gives the capacity for me to and then talk for 10 minutes, right? Like, gives the ability for me to expel all of the air that makes the sound and still have enough air for my body, right? So that expulsion of air coming through the hyoid region, your voice box, is what is making the sound, right? It vibrates, and that vibration here makes the differences, but it is the expulsion of air and the ability to expulse, to push out air through that space, that gives the speech that we have. So I have to have the lung capacity, and I have to have the patterning on my brain. And then I have to have a voice box, a hyoid bone. We absolutely see these all within Neanderthal, and we absolutely see these all within Denisovians. Well, we haven't found a hyoid bone, but we do believe Denisovians speak. The other thing that we see within Neanderthal that is really recent is that we have this understanding of what the bones in the ear state now. So there is this tiny little bone in the interior of your ear, in the interior of your ear. And that tiny little bone we're currently using to pull DNA. We find that this bone is actually our best way to get ancient DNA now. Here it is, December 2013 is when they found the hyoid bone. The analysis of the Neanderthal's fossilized hyoid bone, a horseshoe shaped structure in the neck, suggests the species had the ability to speak. And the hyoid bone was discovered in 1989, but they had to do a bunch of testing for it to for them to accept that's what it meant, right? Because it doesn't fit into the confirmation bias that they currently had. They had to do a bunch of testing. And so that's why it's not published until 2013. But this recent find with the interior of the ear shows that they were actually able to hear speech in the range that we hear speech. Use medical imaging software to create virtual reconstructions of Neanderthal external and middle ear cavities based on CT scans of their skulls. With these models, they could determine the range of sounds that Neanderthals could hear and thus probably produce as speech. This technique has previously been used to study speech and hearing in other ancient humans and chimps. Neanderthal hearing was optimized towards production of consonants that often appear in modern human languages, such as S, K, T, and Th, in the same way our hearing is, says Conde Valverde. And they're using language development, mental capacity, evidence in stone tool use, jewelry making, and art. So between the knowledge of the hyoid bone and the voice box and the lung capacity and the imprint of the brain and the knowledge of them being able to tune to speech, we can tell that they not only have speech, but they have speech that we're going to recognize as speech. It is speech that resembles the same patterning and the same sounds that we are using. And they can also hear the same patternings and sounds that we can hear, so they can interpret our speech in the way that we would have interpreted our speech. Therefore, we would have been able to share languages, right? We would have been able to, teach each other our languages and hear each other's languages and pronounce the spaces and the words within each other's languages. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back on to everybody being able to comment, because that's pretty much the conversation about that. Again, Like I said, this is the first on the subject. There's going to be things that I'm probably going to get better at bringing in tomorrow or Sunday when we come back. But I really want to keep the first series of lives really about the DNA evidence, how we can track through the DNA, this new advent within it. What's the fox gene? I don't know that we had a fox gene. Like I'm going to assume that it has nothing to do with actual foxes, right? Like it just doesn't make sense that it would have actually anything to do with foxes, right? Like, but you said fox, and I've never heard of a fox gene. That's pretty cool. Fox gene for speech. I'm Googling that shit right now, Ducray. Fox 2, Fox P2. Okay. Okay, FOXP2 related speech and language disorder is caused by changes involving the FOXP2 gene. This gene provides instructions for making a protein called forkhead box, which is FOX P2, which appears to be essential for normal speech and development in language. Oh, I don't know. But it is saying that mutations in the FOXP2 gene could help explain why humans can speak but chimps can't. So if it is the gene related to us having speech patterns and they have that speech pattern, I would say that probably. If you do your DNA through Ancestry, Ancestry does a great job in testing your DNA. They don't test a full genome, they just test like 25%. So you're not getting a full study. There's going to be DNA that you don't see in there. Like my DNA says that I have indigenous DNA, but they can't read it on Ancestry. And it says the same thing on another site. And then if I take it to a third site, it can read it and point out where. But the second site says, we see that there's indigenous DNA, but we can't read it. You need to get a full genomic test because it would be in the full genomic test. And 23andMe and Ancestry don't do a full genomic test. They only test a percentage. And then when they tell you that you belong to certain groups, what they're telling you is you belong to the modern day populations of those groups on Ancestry and 23andMe. Other sites will take that DNA and they will match it to like graves, which is a lot better because it's not matching you to current groups because so many mixtures happen in current groups. Like your genes could say that you're Choctaw, but what they're relating you to is not ancient Choctaw genes, but modern Choctaw genes, and you're getting them matched the Europeans within the Choctaw group. We also see that Turtle Island Indigenous people don't put their DNA online usually. Governments have done too much shit with it before, so there's a lot. There are some who do, but very few and far between. So that can be really hard for the matching, but you can take those and again, the link tree in my bio, there's DNA sites at the bottom. You can upload to the DNA sites on the bottom the GED file that you get from Ancestry and 23andMe. I used Ancestry and I used that GED file, and you can upload them to like GED match and your DNA profile and my true ancestry, and you will get direct hits from actual populations that are ancient populations, and so it'll give you a little bit more. Again, though, it's not a full genomic test itself. So for a full genome of your own genome, you have to go expensive. It's $300 at a start for a full genomic test, which I personally haven't done. I'm not fucking $300. I mean, like, sure, I've got that somewhere. Can I not pay my car this month? Um, so you kind of got to look deeper, but you can use those files to look deeper. Hey, social justice. Thank you. I like this. I've got a couple of different ones. It's something that showed up 150,000 years ago. That's interesting. Okay, so I'm going to look into why. Thank you, social justice. I'm going to look into that, Ducray. I'll get a little bit more information on that. who thought erectus spoke because of the complexity of the Acheulean hand axe, and that could be true. Have you read the sexy hand axe theory? There's like a paper that was done stating that they believe that hand axes and my anthropologist professor, my paleoanthropologist professor brought it in and she found it amusing, but she said, you can look at things like this. Like things like this could be factual. We don't know. Doesn't make sense to me, but and it's an entire paper on the idea that the Acheulean hand axe complex is actually a sexual thing. Like it's preening, it's peacocking, the best hand axe that you can make, and it's all premised on the fact that you'll find like hundreds and hundreds of hand axes of different varieties and shapes all in like this same thing, like they were almost just making them and discarding them, right? And so this whole thought process is that this anthropologist believes that people are getting together and doing hand axe making contests, and the hand axe making contests are how people are choosing their mates. So, like, there's a lot of different things that you can see within the Acheulean hand axe theories, right? There's a lot of different things that you can see that are very intense about it, right? And all of them have some thought process that could be structural behind them that could work, right? We don't know. We don't know. It could be. It could be that it was just the only tool that they could figure. Um, you know, uh, there's a lot of different ways we could look at it, right? Tom Borkland's art is everything. I love his art. It's actually I don't think my current profile picture is him. I don't think that's Tom Borkland. I think that's somebody else. But usually Tom Borkland is my profile picture because he's fucking beautiful. Right. And not only does it feel so powerful, but as somebody who has skinned plenty of animals in my life, the realism, like you can see the membrane. And if you don't know, if you've never skinned an animal, that membrane exists between the muscular structure and the skin. And so as you're skinning, you can literally just pull the skin off and the membrane remains. And you can see the patterning on this membrane that's how they did it. Because when you're pulling it rather than cutting it, or you're pulling it and then small cuts. So if you look at this down below here, we're seeing on the right hand or the left hand side, we're seeing the horns. But this kind of front, this is a haunch. This is a shoulder that we're seeing right here, and then an elbow that's poking up, right? And so this along here that we're seeing, you can see where the patterning of it all bunches together, and that's where you can see the pull. But right below that, right underneath the FF of offering on Coco's right now, right? You can see that kind of like really dark space. That's where she probably had to use her knife to hit that membrane and then pull it up again. So you can see from the patterning of the membrane where she pulled it apart and where she had to hit. So what you do as you're stewing it is you lift with this, and then you take your knife and you go like this along, and you can pull it off. And then when it gets stuck, you kind of give this slice to the membrane itself between the hide and the musculature. And in doing that, you get this absolute patterning. So it is totally, totally amazing to me that he has got the detail to the fineness that he does. Yeah, and the Acheulean hand axes could absolutely be some kind of religious offering. There are so many different things that they could be. Um, so, and I think that that's always important when we're looking. There are so many different things that things can be. Often we like to associate them with how we associate now. And associating somebody's thought processes from 300,000 years ago with the association of how we thought process today is faulty. So we should absolutely look at them as being as human and having the same contentments and needs, right? Um, but we think that they are sitting there going, God, in the future, I'm going to have so much better. Like we think that they're not, you're content in your life. You don't see that there's going to be a future where we fly, right? They're content in their life. They don't see a future that has telephones, right? They got all they need. They're happy, you know. And not only that, but we can tell that they decorated their homes extensively We can tell that they decorated themselves extensively. We can tell that they had religious or spiritual thought processes. We can tell all of that stuff, which we will be getting into within this. And all of those things means that they really have this humanity to them that we often forget, right? I like to often try and remind people you are your ancestors' pride and joy. Your ancestors worked so hard so that they could sit and do nothing. They worked their asses off so that they could sit and read a book and drink a cup of tea. And the fact that you can sit and read a book and drink a cup of tea without the backbreaking work that they had to do is their pride and joy. They're happy for it. They are so glad that was their intent, was that you would be better set than they were, right? Our ancestors were also happy in the space that they were in because the work that they did saw them through their day, and at the end of the day they were able to sit. We often think of hunter gatherer people as working more than we do, but the king people of Australia, wait a minute, I think Australia, it might be Africa. It's an exclamation point, KUNG. Maybe it is in Africa. They did a study with them as a modern hunter gathering population in a desert environment, and the overachievers had 16 hours of work in a week. The overachievers. Everybody else did a roughly 8 hours of work in a week, right? To sustain the population, to feed and clothe the population. The overachievers did 16 hours in a week. So you go out and you get your food and you get your needs and you come home and you sit in your cave or in a house that you've built that we just can't find in the archaeological record because wood degrades, right? In the house that you have, and you sit with your family and you eat your food and you converse and you talk, right? And you create, you make new tools, you decorate yourself, you joke and you laugh, just like you do today, with less stress, much less stress than you have today. Um, so it's pretty amazing to me. I think Ryan's offended by me. Did Neanderthals reproduce a lot? Did they have more female offspring than males? So our current knowledge says that it looks like the Neanderthal Y DNA male line passed out really early in our existence and was replaced by our Y DNA, our male line. There's this thought that they almost went extinct, and that there's a couple times that they almost went extinct. And in this first almost extinction, there's a replacement of their Y DNA, their masculine line, with our Y DNA, our masculine line. Um, and so we think this might also be why we're not seeing any Neanderthal Y DNA. Like we can't find Neanderthal Y DNA. Of the 18 Neanderthals that we've been able to test, we haven't found Neanderthal Y DNA. Denny has a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovian father, right? I think that's it, right, Decray? Um, and so we're not seeing Y DNA. Absolutely, Carrie Ann. And it is absolutely due to forced removal and colonization. And that's why land back is important. One of the many reasons. Um, the main reason that land back is important is because indigenous people tending the land will stop the climate destruction that Western agriculture is causing, right? And returning tending of land to indigenous peoples across the globe will stop the climate destruction that Western agriculture causes as it comes in and removes entire biomes, right? So, um, but another reason is because we lived better, we were healthier and happier. Everybody was fed, nobody was homeless and starving. Indigenous people don't have homeless and starving people. Everybody has value to community, right? So There's a lot of really important reasons, but that is very much one of them is we don't have those things in indigenous communities because everybody is important in indigenous communities. Everybody has value in indigenous communities just by living. I'm going to go ahead and go. I'm trying to keep these lives just to a couple of hours so that I can do some other stuff. Again, I should have a publish publication done by the end of next week. I am currently doing the final drafting on it, and then I'm going to put it over to a couple of my friends to look through it and make sure it's edited. It'll be published on Amazon for free so that everybody can get a look at it. And it is a treatise on the right to life. Um, and awesome. Oh, I heard the other day somebody said that all Sarahs with an H descend from a singular triceratops with an H in the word triceratops during the Paleocene. And my daughter sent this to me, and I told her that she's correct. That is all Sarahs with an H. All Sarahs without an H descend from a single triceratops that we called Sarah, and the documentary about her was called Land Before Time. So the rest of us Sarahs come from that Sarah. Anyways, um, but I will be doing a little bit, yeah. um, and it's more. So what I'm going to kind of do is it's chapters basically. It's not going to be long. It's probably going to be 15, 16 pages tops. Um, and I'm going to do a treatise on each of the rights that we have, and then I'm going to do a couple of other things. And basically, I'm going to be publishing them almost as I kind of think of it as the pamphlets that we did initially, right? Like when we first had the printing press and we were doing pamphlets so that people could read information and gather information and knowledge. And it's kind of what I want to try and do. It will all be free. It will all be free. Oh, Tom Borkland is on Insta, and I pulled this from Insta. You should look at his art. His art. Go to Insta. It is amazeballs. His art is amazeballs. He doesn't have a website. All of his stuff is on Insta and Twitter, but he's pretty amazing. Turtle Island is one of the phrases translated into English used in indigenous people of North America. Many different nations on the eastern seaboard use the phrasing Turtle Island, and it's an English translation I use for North America. Yes, absolutely, social justice. It teaches you that your value is based on what can be exploited out of you, right? How exploitable are you? What can I exploit out of you? Thank you, Nightshade. Okay, so I'm going to take off. I will be back Sunday night at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I will just be doing lives mainly for the next couple of weeks as I get this publication out. I'm also doing t-shirts as I was asked. So we will have some t-shirts going as well. I will see you all Sunday. Have a great one. Enjoy your week. Enjoy your weekend. I'm hoping to watch Way of Water. So you know, get me a little avatar going. Have a great one. Enjoy yourself. Mwah. Enjoy yourself on YouTube as well. And this should all be over on YouTube pretty much automatically so you can watch it again. And I will see you guys soon. Bye, YouTube.